Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. I just went off for a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you to the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. I will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you will purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you, so relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today, I have the very great honor of introducing Dorthe Nors and Jennifer Haigh, here to discuss and celebrate the release of Dorthe's new book and first work of nonfiction, A Line in the World, A Year on the North Sea Coast. Dorthe Nors is the author of the story collections Wild Swims and Karate Chop, 4 novels, including Mirror Shoulder Signal, a finalist for the Man Booker International Prize, and 2 novellas collected in So Much for That Winter. She lives in Denmark. And today's moderator, Jennifer Haigh, is the author of 7 works of fiction, including Mrs. Kimball, Faith, and most recently, Mercy Street. Her short stories have been published widely in Granta, The Atlantic, The Best American Short Stories, and many other places. A frequent contributor to the New York Times Book Review, she'll be teaching this spring in the MFA program at Boston University. I'm so thrilled to have them here together in conversation. And now Dorthe and Jennifer.
Okay, hello, Dorthe. It's lovely to talk with you across the ocean. I am here in Boston, and I think the last time Dorthe and I did a conversation, we were at Brookline Booksmith. So this is quite a different experience in our little transatlantic boxes, but it's very nice to see you all the same.
It's lovely seeing you.
I am so thrilled to be here to talk with Dorthe about this new book. I've been a fan of Dorthe's work for a long time. We met, I think it was 2014. I was trying to figure out when that was. I think it was 2014 in Denmark. I was doing a residency working on my novel Heat and Light, not far from where Dorthe was living at the time. And that's when I became aware of her novels and short stories. And I have since become her greatest living fan. So it is a great honor to talk about this very, very different kind of book. For those who don't know Dorthe's work, her novels and short stories are very widely read in Denmark and now internationally. Those are the forms we are used to reading her in. And this book is a whole other thing. It's quite a departure for a writer at mid-career to do this. So I guess my first question is, can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this book, the project you embarked on, where you got the idea, and how you started?
Thank you, Jennifer, and it's great seeing you again. I wish I could be there, but this is a good solution when we cannot be there together. The idea for this book came out of the blue and not from me. I was contacted by a photographer who was going to do a photo book about the North Sea coastline. And he wanted somebody to write the text for it. And he asked if I wanted to do that. And I said, no. I was actually at the place where we met. That is the Danish Writers and Translators Center, having a residency there, trying to start a novel. I was writing on a novel. And he didn't take no for an answer. So he kept on asking, and I kept on saying, no, I would not write the text for that. And the reason why I was asked was that I was the only writer in Denmark living on the North Sea coast. So, I mean, that was the reason why I was asked. So it became Christmas that year, and it grew on me, not the photo book project as such, but the idea of driving into the landscape, taking a year out of heavy publishing. You've been there. It's like when you've done that for a number of years, writing, publishing, writing, launching, constantly in that hamster wheel, it just felt like, oh, I could just withdraw into the landscape. I could just take a year and then do something that I want to do. Obviously, the book business would go, don't do this. And I went, oh, but that would just be so good for me to do that. So I said yes to this project. There was a very big foundation that poured money into it because photos are super expensive. So what happened was that I took that 1 year, and during that year, COVID hit. So it became a blessing that I could still do my work. I could still do the research. I could just drive into the landscape, and I was also funded. A lot of my colleagues didn't make any money in those years, but it was a blessing that I could do this. And I must say that it's the book I've written that has been most profound for my soul, if you can say that. It was really, really good that I did it. It was like returning home, and probably one of those books that you do in your career that you will later look back on and go, well, that was necessary to write. Might not be obvious to others, but it was necessary for me and my writing.
Yeah, well, you have a long relationship with this landscape. One of the things you write about in the early essays of the book is this vacation house, second house that your family had, this little cottage that you call the secret place.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that house, where it was, and how it was important for you growing up?
My parents bought this little cottage. It's like a hunter's cabin because my father shot ducks, and well, he really didn't, but he liked to pretend that he was a good hunter. And so they bought that when I was just 2 years old, so I can't remember that house wasn't there. We spent our weekends there, summers. It was just a part of our life. It's in a reserve, a nature reserve. So there are not other houses around. It's down to the Limfjord, which is part of this coastline. And it's a bird. There are a lot of birds there. The transatlantic flyway goes, the East Transatlantic flyway goes right through this area and across the house. So it's a small house. You're hardly protected in it. And yet it was just like, being a fox in its cave, right? It was so safe in them. So I've known that all my life. And then on top of that, all my ancestors, my entire family comes from this coastline, because the logic of Danish history is that people would walk, sort of migrate from the west to the east, and so did my grandparents and great-grandparents. They started out here and then they moved into the middle of the country, and somebody like me would even go all the way to Copenhagen. So it was like home to me. This is the landscape I came from. This is where I grew up, and this is where my family came from. That's the dialect I know. That is the way of communicating. I know, I understand the wind, and I understand how to read the landscape here in a way that I don't understand how to read it anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, your intimacy with this landscape, and also this sense of time. You get the feeling this is an ancient place, and you have this ancestral relationship with it that goes way back. And yet it's a landscape that is also changing, as all landscapes do. It's in a constant state of change. One of the unexpected features of this cottage your family had is that it offers a view of a chemical plant. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and the role it has played in the recent history of this landscape.
They built this extremely big chemistry plant there in the 50s or 60s, in the middle of the 50s. And back then there was no care for the landscape at all. They just poured the poison right into the landscape. So about the time my parents bought this place, the poison had just been dug into the landscape for 20 years or something. The interesting thing, what I wanted to do when I wrote about that was to say that children normalize everything. So to me, in that landscape, the chemistry plant is part of the landscape. Even today, when I go there, if somebody would move the chemistry plant, I would think that something was missing from the landscape. So it goes to say that the things that human beings do to the landscape is also a kind of nature, or at least it gets adopted into how children perceive landscape and nature. And that, I mean, the chemistry plant is a really foul thing to look, but that goes for agriculture, that goes for everything that people do to the landscape. We sort of adopt it into how we perceive landscapes. And it's, of course, I wanted to write about it because we are destroying nature. We're destroying animals. We're incredibly egoist, and we have lost our connection to the landscape and the understanding of how we are nothing without it. And also, in particular on this coastline, where the nature is so strong and the landscape in itself is so fragile that it can change overnight. I mean, one storm and the landscape can be completely altered when you wake up. And so when you're out there, I mean, you understand that this is stronger than you are. And if you mess with it, it will win in the end. And what happened with this chemistry factory is that they make very, very big deposits, where they poured in cans and cans of poison. And then the storms came, and they, of course, uncovered this poison. The storms and the North Sea just kept on, you know, showing that the problem was there. And so that's what I'm taking from that, is that, then, you know, you can do that, but the landscape will win. I mean, and you'll be just sort of gone in this enormous history that the world is, that the globe is, that our universe is. This is just your little breath of nothing in something that is so much bigger that you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, you know, the book does a great job of conveying this, the power of nature, and also how it dwarfs human beings. There's a great anecdote, I can't remember which essay it's in, where you're walking on the beach and you meet a woman who has found a jawbone. And you get this sense that nothing can stay buried on the North Coast, that the weather is constantly working on the landscape. Nothing is going to stay where you put it. So this whole idea that you could bury chemical waste on this coast and expect it to stay where you put it is ridiculous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just like I mean, civilization has completely lost its sense of what it is and where it came from, if it can do something like that. I mean, and yes, nothing is fixed here. It's like a fluid. Time is fluid here. The landscape is fluid. And it's like, there's one place where I say that once I was young, I was looking at a lighthouse that was out there, and I was wondering, where should I go in life? How should I move? What will be my destiny? How will I get to the lighthouse? And the logic is actually, you should just sit tight, and the landscape will make the lighthouse come to you. I mean, you should adjust to the landscape, and it will come to you. So it was really interesting to have a look at the way civilization perceives itself up against to these immense powers, this incredible energy that is nature. And also to keep in mind that nature, which in the biblical sense has been perceived as evil, is no such thing. It's just a strong will. It's not either good or bad or all these things. It's a strong will, and it's a force that drives through the universe, and you have to deal with it.
Yeah. You know, I wonder if that, and this may be reductionist and oversimplifying things, but it's a thought I often had in reading this book, that it's a different way of looking at landscape than I have ever read before. And we talked about this a little bit when we did our tech check before the event. And I think it is, you know, there is this sense that this is a landscape that has been observed by men for many centuries, and men have been writing about it. But to have a female eye on this landscape is a new thing. In the first essay, The Line, you write about this common idea in Denmark that Denmark is really the area around Copenhagen. It's the setting of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales that somehow became the definition of what is Danish. It's a traditional view, and it's also kind of a male view. And you write this line I just love. Women's relationships with the landscapes were largely undocumented. Their feeling for nature was at best irrelevant, at worst dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I love that, Dean. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. Why dangerous?
Well, dangerous because we perhaps, we didn't see it as our property. We kind of merged with it. And all these powers that we were talking about just 5 minutes ago, that these forces of the universe seem to have a stronger hold of women. I mean, there was a sort of, the distance between the observer and what was observed. They were scared that that distance would be lost if women did it. Throughout tradition, women have had another link to nature, and also the idea that female sexuality and what can't we control if women sort of, gain power over that. But it is also about property. I mean, the first thing I did when I had to write this book, or decided to do so, I checked out what kind of literature that was already written about this coastline. And I found 3 different kinds. There were, of course, almost very boring things that had been written about who owned what and where and what farmer had this and that. That aside, that was pure masculine property writing. And then there was also the artistic ones that came in the late 18th century. But they were very picturesque. It was like a man walking in his fine clothes. He's very, very civilized man. He was educated at the academy. He was sort of overwhelmed by the beauty of this landscape. He was never embedded in it. He walked on top of it and around it. He was never, he never tripped and fell. He never got water on him. He never had sand drift in his face. He was constantly hovering about it in a very powerful way. So these 2 types of control, controlling the landscape and showing that you had power over it. I knew that when I was going to write this from my standpoint, I wanted to be taken into the landscape. I wanted to walk in it, trip and fall, be engulfed by it, and not at one point think that I owned it. I wanted to go the other way, that I'm just like, I'm part of this, but I'm just a visitor from this specific time in the universe. I'm the one who gets to walk here, but in a second I'll be gone. And so I just have to drink it in. And then also I noticed in the books written about the landscape that the lives that women lived here were hardly described. So, and there are very strong women who live on coastlines everywhere there are strong women, but on coastlines, they often live without men because the men drown, or they go to sea, or they are at sea for longer intervals. So there are matriarchy. How do you say that in English? Matriarch?
Matriarchies.
Yeah, matriarchy all over the place. And I thought it was interesting not to rule out the history of men on this coast, but to sort of show the other half's life here, how women lived here. And they lived in a different kind of relationship to the ocean. Also with a lot of sorrow, because there was a lot of loss connected to it, but with a lot of power, with a lot of empowerment also.
I think about maps. I think of who drew the earliest maps we have. And of course, they were drawn by men. And so just this idea that a coastline is something you can put down on paper, you can say, this is what it is. I have declared it to be so. And the coastline doesn't care what you think it is, because it's already changed since you made the map. It's constantly remodeling itself. in response to these forces that are much bigger than any of us human beings. So the form of this book, it's a very different thing for you, and it's kind of a hard thing to describe. So for those who haven't yet read the book, there are 14 individual pieces that stand on their own. I suppose you could call them essays, but I don't think that does them justice. The form is sort of part essay, part memoir. There's some history, there's some personal history. In the US, we would call it creative nonfiction. I don't know if that's a thing in Denmark. But I was struck reading this that every one of these discrete pieces is in some way an exercise in memory. Also, so there's an element of memoir to it as well. It's the story of your family, it's your development as a writer, and it's kind of interwoven with the history of the place in this kind of meditative way. It's a whole other kind of writing. So I wonder if you would read a little bit for us so our audience can hear the language and get a sense for it. It's a passage we talked about. It starts on page 25.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Great.
It's from the chapter or essay, The Shortest Night. It's the time of year when we burn a female doll. It's a tradition, an annual thing in Denmark, an act that has clicked into place. We Danes are more or less in agreement. All of this is a game we play. Burning the evil has its roots in ancient rituals and 17th century witches at the stake. We can agree on that too. But it's only in the past century that the ritual has come into fashion, and whether it is a cozy custom or a problem is something to be discussed over strawberries picked for the celebration. She will be burned. Tonight, as legend tells, she will fly to Brocken and Hecla, dispatched like sparks above a bonfire. She and her sister witches will celebrate their Sabbath on the mountains there. It's a Midsummer's Eve party, a celebration of cleansing and solstice. The light is here, but the darkness is as well, and now the great wheel turns. We walk to the holy springs and wash our wounds. Herbs in the woods and meadows have drunk from the energies of the universe and drawn rich growth from all existence. We pick the herbs at night, on our guard against the glowworm's bite. We read omens, we tuck flowers under our pillows. Our brown calves are wet with cuckoo spit while the bonfire burns down. It is the longest day, the magic's night. Everything has opened and yielded, a rattling door unto the darkness. We burn a female doll in that opening, and I've never felt much like taking part. When I was a child, a man caught fire at a midsummer celebration my family was attending. It was the host. He'd built the witch himself the day before out of a couple of brooms tied crosswise. He had doused the bonfire liberally with petrol that afternoon, but before the burning, he thought it could do with one more drop. I saw the thing myself, him running around in his nylon shirt with a jerry can, sloshing petrol onto the fire. We saw too the lighter, the spark, the catching, and how someone flung themselves on top of him to extinguish their flames. They rolled him around on the ground and crouched beside him on their haunches as the bonfire burned. It was such a silent, mild night. We could follow the sound of the ambulance all the way from the hospital in the city to far out in the countryside where we stood and where the party was over.
It's wonderful. And it's so intricately done, the way memory is woven into the perceptions of this place. Also, that ritual of burning the doll, I think to American readers is so exotic. I've never heard of that before. It's
Isn't
really
exotic a nice word for it?
There are a lot of words for it.
Yes.
But it's interesting that it's a female doll. It's not a male doll.
Well,
is
it
a
was
female doll.
actually sometime. I remember we have been burning trolls when I was a child. So, so it was magicians. It was medieval magicians, but that would turn into be only witches. But I actually do remember a troll that is a male witch being burned at a stake, but that was rare. I think I've only tried it once when I was a child. It's I mean, we discuss it every year around Sankt Hans, as it's called in Denmark, whether we should drop that tradition. And my sense is that it will probably disappear slowly because there are generations of women who just don't want to participate in it anymore. So, so let that tradition be gone.
Well, you know, when I think about the books I've written, I find that the book always begins as one thing. And the initial conception of it can be very narrow and sort of tightly focused. And then by the time I've finished writing it, it has become something else. Mm-hmm. So I'm always interested in this with writers. How did your book change from your initial intention versus what you ended up writing? Like what was that evolution like?
I'd say one of the things with memory, I didn't want to write a memoir, but what I found very early on when I moved into the landscape was that what place does to us, and that doesn't matter where you come from and who you are and where you live in the world. When you come to a place, the way you locate to it is through memory. And you will have this kind of archive in your head. And it's not like there are traumas or anything, but when you pop up in that place, these memories will come back. That is why we don't want to go back to the school where we were bullied, because the bullying comes back. That's why people hesitate to go back to Auschwitz, right? Because that's where the memories are embedded. And all the beautiful things and all the less interesting things will also stir up when you come to a place. You probably haven't thought about this for 30 years. There was that memory that you had completely forgotten. There it was. So I thought, okay, so if I want the reader to understand how they themselves engage to a place, I have to donate this thing from myself to do that. So that was one thing. And then because I said, conceptually, I have 1 year because I have to get back to that novel I was supposed to write. So I would take my car and I would go out. And then I would go back and say, oh, so I want to write this about this place. And then the next chapter should be this and this and this. So after a year, when I sat down and read the whole thing, they had been written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so forth. So I thought, God, I wrote some kind of novel. That was not the idea. But I think that is what happened. That's also why you say it's not essays, but what is it? So when it came to, when it was adapted to the American language, it soon became chapters instead of essays, because there is this sense of it's the same consciousness that travels through something and is on a journey to discover what time and place means to us and what identity means to us. There was a review in the US yesterday, which was brilliant. And I say brilliant because she wrote it so well, and she lived not far from indigenous country. And says, I truly understand why the memory or the story that they have locked into that place, and the stories that we as settlers here, white settlers here, what we took here and what new generations will take here, and it's all there. It's like nothing of it's like it depends on the person who enters the place, what the place is. And I found that incredibly beautiful. And also I love to write to the world, and I also knew that if I wanted people other places in the world to understand this, I could not focus on things that were super local. I had to lift it up on an existential level, where people who live by the Mississippi will have the same feeling of, oh yeah, I belong here. This is where my time and place is. This is where I am. This is my point of departure. There's no place else in the world that I understand better than this, which doesn't mean that the other places aren't important, but there's something very magical about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the universality in this story comes from the personal parts of it. There was one passage that I was so moved by, and it's not really central to the book because it's not about this landscape. it's about your parents who had to leave their home. Can you talk about that? So the house that you grew up in, that your parents had to move away from this home. And it made me think about how everything changes and how the impermanence of everything. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was quite a blow to my parents. They had built this place and they had planted the forest around it. And then one day an expressway was going to go straight for the house. So it was demolished and they had to move 2 kilometers away. You could say that growing up close to the North Sea educated you in the fact that houses will disappear because they do. But it was, of course, very sad. And at that point, I was living in Copenhagen and I had this international writing career going nuts. And I was feeling quite a kind of rootless. And at the same time, the place I came from wasn't there anymore. Mm-hmm. So moving back to this landscape from Copenhagen and buying a little house out here was a way of getting new roots, settling down, get my own roots, my own place, my own home, it's strange. It was a really, really crazy time to walk in the opposite direction of what everybody expected from me, but truly necessary. And it was not an easy journey. But that thing, when you grew up in a place and you live there forever and then it disappears, it has been it's a special experience. People will know, everyone who's been very attached to a place will know what that feels like.
Yeah. You know, I'm so interested in what this experience was like for someone who's always been a fiction writer. Because I'm a fiction writer myself, I don't write anything that I don't invent. And so to go from this invented world that you're very skilled at and have been doing for many years to write about things that exist in the world and people who exist in the world, what was that like? Did it feel different to write nonfiction?
Yeah, there were times where I would be sitting in my office and go, oh, I can't wait to get back to fiction because then I can actually just invent stuff to explain what it is that I'm interested in or curious about. But here I always had to have the facts straight, also to not hurt people's feelings or make sure that I didn't get it wrong and you know, was rewriting history in a really bad way. But it was also, yes, I added or donated my own life to it, but that's very curated. I was very aware that it would be personal bits, not me. I mean, do you understand the distance between my personal life, my private life is not in the book as such. I mean, I talk about my parents and my grandmother and stuff, but they're like characters. I don't reveal anything bad about them. I mean, this is not autofiction. They play a role in this book like anybody's mom or dad or anybody's grandmother or anybody's brother. Or friend or and I also put fiction in there. The fun thing is that people don't know. I didn't put fiction in about myself, but there is a specific passage in the novel that is sort of a story that I made up because and it's towards the end. And it was just, I longed so much for fiction to get my point across. So I said, I'm just gonna do this fictionally. And I asked some Danish friends I have who are also writers, that can I just do this? Can I just just make it up? They said. So there is a place where I made something up.
Now we're all dying to know what it is, though. So can you tell us, or do we have to guess?
Teaser, you have to find out yourself.
Okay. Oh, that's funny. So I want to talk a little bit about translation, because of course this is a work in translation, and because I don't read Danish, everything of yours I've read has been in translation. Can you talk a little bit about that process of working with a translator? How does, because your English is so very good and so fluent, and you read in English, and do you have an active role in that process?
Yes, I do. I mean, I have wonderful translator on the fiction or the literature I write, and when
Misha, the great Misha, yes.
Misha, and on this one it's Caroline Waight. It's a new translator, British translator, who did this one, and then when it's articles or essays for the media, I write them directly in English. I feel a little bit rusty in my English today, and that's because I'm in Denmark. It's like, just before I went into my office, everything was in Danish, and then I have to transfer it to English. It's like, blah. Yeah. But of course, in a book like this, there will also be dialect, and a very specific way of tuning Danish that is connected to my specific way of speaking Danish, which is Jutlandic. And so I participate, the translator write it, and I read it, and then I go, so this is dialect, I will point out dialect, or also what is specific is, and what is really hard in Danish is that we tend, especially on the West Coast, to put content beneath the lines, where English is more prone to keep it in the sentence. We sort of speak beneath the lines. So I participate in that process. I don't budge in the translation as such, because the translator is a person who knows the language to the marrow bone, and that's what I need. But I actually enjoy that. I enjoy to be nosy in that process, and to see how it works. And yeah, it's quite magical to be part of.
So was it different working with a different translator? This was the first time you'd worked with Caroline?
Yes, it's different for each translator that you work with. Caroline, who did a great job on this, is younger than the other translators I've worked with, and she's super talented. She's a master in, I think, music and literature, and that, that musicality was something that I thought was really fun to work with. Yes, it is different from some translators want to get really close with you. They want to be very connected to you, also private, and talk and everything. And other are more like, I only need your literature. That's what I need. And Caroline is just like, she's it's okay with her with the literature. And I really appreciate that, because that was a really good work energy for me, that she was so into the literature and so into the work. And then we had a very intense working experience together with the language of it. And then, yeah, so really good. You've experienced the same, haven't you? I mean,
I have, and I'm struck by the really dramatic differences in the way different translators work. For a while, I had two translators who worked together, translating my work into Dutch. And they were extremely present, and I feel like I was in touch with them every single day. And then I've had other translators whom I've never heard from at all, and I just am presented with the book when it's finished. And then there's everything in the middle too. I read French, and I speak French, so that's kind of the translation where I can be of any help at all. But with some of the others, I will never learn Serbo-Croatian. No. It's not going to happen in this lifetime. So I have no way of knowing, how that book reads. I don't even have a friend who reads Serbo-Croatian. So, it's, in a way, it's an exercise in letting go.
Yeah.
Because so when you're the writer, you have control over everything. You choose every comma, every period. And when your work is published in translation, it's a surrender. You are surrendering yourself to this process. And the benefit is you get all these new readers whom you would never otherwise be able to communicate with. But to get that, you have to surrender control. And I think for many writers, that is psychically difficult.
It is. It's a leap of faith.
Mm.
But the good thing for me about participating in the English translation as good as I can is that when I get questions from Serbo-Croatia or China or other places, and it's almost the same places every time. It's the same place where they're in doubt of how to translate it. I can go to the English because I participated in that.
Yeah.
So I think sticking to, I mean, being a nuisance to one translator, because I think it's a nuisance to them sometimes, but being that actually helps all the others, because that means that there's always one manuscript that you can refer back to and see what was decided there, because I was part of that decision. Yeah, so that's what I dwell on the on the thought that they read the English one as well, then also they know. Yeah, but have you ever translated from French to English?
I have, and it was a revelation to me to what degree a translator is rewriting your book. And I never fully understood that. When I've translated from French, I'm rewriting somebody's work. And there are so many choices you make. Every sentence can be rendered many different ways. So over the course of a novel, the thousands and thousands of decisions you're making. And it made me really understand to what degree you are in the translator's hands and at their mercy. So in a way, after having done it myself, I was more alarmed about the whole business. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I know that the translation is good in English or Swedish or Norwegian, which are the languages that I understand. When I read it, that it still feels like it's my text. I can tell that they've changed stuff and they have to move things around, but that's still me. I mean, I can still hear that's my voice. And then I know it's a good translator, because that's what they do. They pick up on the voice. Yeah. They get a sense. It's like, I mean, it's like a composer who writes a piece of music, and they're the piano players who come and interpret that piece of music, but it should still be that piece of music. But so that's why music is, if I hear that my translator is connected to music in any kind of way, or any kind of artistic art form, literature is also it's a musicality. It's a type of music to me, literature. Then I know that, okay, I'm better off than I would have been if it was just somebody who knew the grammar, right? Have you ever heard a mathematician play the piano? I lived with a mathematician once who could do anything on a piano, but it wasn't music, right? He had all the notes, but it was not music. So that's what a translator should do. They're like a virtuoso of the piano, but they didn't write the piece.
That's a great comparison, actually. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, so we have time now for some questions. I'm looking at the Q&A and I don't see any. So audience members out there, have we got some questions? Or Pierce, maybe you see some.
Oh, they're starting to come in, but I think while they come in, I had one. And
Sure.
I'll jump in. So this has been stunning. Thank you both. You talked a lot in the last 45 minutes about the coast, about the people, and I'm wondering about the other part of what a coast is. I'd love to hear you talk about the ocean. Could you do that a little bit for us? Because you write about it so beautifully in the book, and you have a personal experience there, and then there's also the ways that other people are interacting with the ocean and a very it's in a scary way in my mind. Yeah,
well, the ocean is scary, and the North Sea is a brutal sea. It's been throughout history cold, stormy, crazy, but also a place that has connected Northern Europe, and also, I would say, Northern Europe to the rest of the world. When I go to, most people who go to the beach, they will go, so this is where the land ends. That's what they think. And I have always been looking at the sea and thinking, oh, so this is where the world begins. So that's what a coastline is. To some, it's the ending, and to others, it's the beginning. And it's the beginning to me because the ocean and the North Sea is the original route to the British Isles, to America, to Africa, to the entire world, to all these languages and cultures and stuff that is out there. And it's fruitful. It will make you rich. And all people, I saw there were people from the Netherlands also participating here, is that what people on this coastline have learned from ancient times is that when you settle here, you can gain access to the world and to wealth and power, but it might kill you. It will kill you. So that's the bet you put in, is that to get all these riches. And I mean, I did a podcast with a British podcast the other day, because the book is out in the UK right now also. And it suddenly hit me that, you know, you become an opportunist when you live close to the sea, because you see opportunities out there. And I suddenly heard myself telling this British man, that's why you colonized the entire world. I mean, it's an island. You could just go woof that way, right? And of course, sometimes there's a passage in the book where I also, which I did when I was a child, had a fantasy about what would happen if all the water disappeared. And we would look out on this moon landscape, this immense, this incredible landscape that we don't know what it looks like. So the ocean is also secretive. It has not revealed itself. It's hiding itself. There will be valleys and mountains and rivers and everything underneath that surface, and we don't know. I mean, we can measure it, but we can't see it. And so it becomes secretive and magic. And everything that is secretive and is also a bit dangerous, because what is lurking in there? So we can just pour our imaginations and what we fear, our fears and longings, we can just put it all in there, because nobody knows.
You know, I love the observation you make in the book that people think of this coastline as the west coast of Denmark, but it's actually the east coast of the ocean. You know, so it entirely depends on your frame of reference. Is it east or west?
Yeah.
That's terrific. So we have a question here from Greg Cantor. The question is, how has this journey into nonfiction and into nature impacted your fiction writing?
I think it has perhaps made me more sensual to how I describe nature. I've become better at it because I've rehearsed it. And I enjoy it a lot. I'm actually reading Wind in the Willows right now, which is from 1909. And I'm struck by the power of nature writing in that book. It is so incredibly beautiful. And what I thought when I read it is that, oh, he has been looking at nature so much, this Graham who wrote it. Isn't his name Graham? It's gone now, sorry. But that, you know, that sensuality towards the surroundings and the light and all these things. I would like to think that I'm walking down that path in my new novel, the novel that I'm working on right now, and which won't be done for years, so no worry. But I definitely enjoy adding that to the universe I'm creating now.
Mm-hmm. So here's another question. This is a good one. I'm curious about what you left out of the book. Are there stories that didn't make it into the final publication? Is there anything you wish you had included that you did not?
No, there was a chapter that I decided to take out. And it was actually because I felt it was too political. It was about the biggest river in Denmark was straightened out when I was in the 60s. And then a a decade ago, they gave it back all these curves and all this natural meandering. And I decided to take it out of the book, not because I don't think it's important to explain what happens when you do something that stupid to a landscape, but because our time is so political. We are so mad. We are so angry and so scared of catastrophe. We think the others are evil. We're constantly preaching on Facebook, Twitter, and everything. So I thought, okay, so if we want people to understand what landscape is and what nature is, I want to try to write a love story. I mean, I want to go into this landscape and try a different kind of approach, because I felt, it was like, you want to take a photograph of a big, giant, beautiful tree, but you don't think that tree is dramatic enough. So you take a jerry can of gasoline, and you go to the tree and you pour gasoline on the tree and you light it, and then you take a photo of it because now it's dramatic. And that approach to nature, that it should be something that it isn't, or that it should be up-edited to participate in a noble cause, killing it while it's making nature a martyr in a human cause. I wanted to sort of, so it actually took that out. It was a brilliant essay. It's not been used for anything. It's just sitting here in my drawers. But yeah.
Have you any interest in publishing it by itself?
Maybe one day. It should probably be rewritten. So because I don't know. But yes, it's still interesting. But it didn't fit into the book. So that I took out.
I was wondering, Dorthe, have any of these essays, because they all do stand alone, they're quite self-contained, have any of them been published solo or just together in a book?
They have not been published solo before the book came out. Afterwards, they were published here and there, one by one. Also in the US and in the UK and in Denmark, and so to that, yes, but not before it was published in Denmark.
It's very interesting. I did a story collection, News from Heaven, a few years ago, and that was the one book that I completely backed into because it was just the reverse. I wrote these stories one by one and I published them in magazines. And I never thought about collecting them together. And if I had, I'm sure I would have gone about it quite differently, but that was the book I backed into. It was just, I never intended it to be a book, and then suddenly it was. And I think short stories can sometimes work that way. But what you're doing here really is more novelistic, as you were saying earlier. Like, there is this consistent voice, there is this kind of spine to the story. And they're really connected to each other in a way that collected short stories sometimes are not.
Exactly. And then also it was and I like conceptual writing. Some people, for instance, read my book Minani's Rehearsal Space, will notice that I can be pretty conceptual. So I always do something that makes it difficult for me. I choose to do something when I embark on a new book that will make it difficult for me, because that will force me into writing stronger, to pay attention and not be too comfortable about what I can do, not play the same tune on the fiddle every time. I mean, so on this one, it was 12 months, that time. And I think that spills into how this book reads. And that I didn't always have control of what story would come after the other. So that the whole meandering of it, that the whole walking in and out, and suddenly I'm in Amsterdam and then I'm back on the coast, it has a sort of natural it's like a field mice walking in a field will have this kind of meandering way of moving across the field, and that comes in natural if you do like that. But that was the concept that made it. It was not something I made up in my head. It was just putting a concept in that, and that made it come out naturally. So
Yeah, it's like the river before they straightened it out.
exactly.
Yes.
Good point.
Yeah. Well, Dorthe, this has been so enjoyable, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I love this book. I found it so completely transporting. It made me miss Denmark. And
Can I say I love this one. Just to let all the readers here, also the Danish and Dutch readers, that if you really want to read a book of our time, you should read Jennifer's Mercy Street.
of our very scary time in the US.
Oh, scary times,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Dorthe and to Piers and everyone at Brookline Booksmith, which is a wonderful, wonderful bookstore for those who are living far away. Please stop by the store should you ever visit Boston. It is not to be missed.
Thank you both so much. I hope in person next time for the next book. Yes, exactly. We put links in the chat for Mercy Street and A Line in the World. It just came in this week. It's beautiful. It has also the most stunning illustrations.
Yeah, remember that. By Sina. Sina Parkins.
And I could not recommend it more highly. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jennifer and Dorthe.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.